I'm Jim Harrington.
And I'm Trisha Taylor, and this is the Leader's Journey podcast. So we don't do a ton of small talk on this thing, but this is just fun. And I want our listeners to know this, that you and your family were at the rodeo yesterday.
Exactly.
Because Gavin, who some of our listeners know, at least through reputation, was in a mutton busting contest.
That's exactly right.
I think you're going to have to tell some of our listeners what a mutton busting contest is.
So they had about 20 kids and 20 sheep, sheep.
Right.
And they put the kid on the sheep without a saddle or anything to hold on to. And the sheep runs 100 yards and they see how long they can hold on. And it's just hysterical. And the kid, they wear helmets and all the 9 yards. And it was a lot of fun. Our whole family was there laughing and cheering him on. And he didn't win the contest, but here's what we think he did win.
What?
They lined all the kids up when it was over and had them smile and wave at the camera. Gavin's got that down to an art form. He was just smiling and having a great time.
And he's such a cutie. And if people don't know what the Houston Rodeo is, it is just really a whole thing. And that is so fun that he got to do that. He'll remember that forever.
He will.
Very fun. Okay, well, that's not what we're talking about today. But I do want to take a minute at the beginning of this podcast to just let people know about a few new things. We actually don't do a ton of new things, but we've got several that we're rolling out here that are happening over at the Leader's Journey. And one is that we're going to do a book club about our book, The Leader's Journey. And what we want to do is just have some really in-depth dialogue about the book. Lots of our listeners have read the book. Maybe they read it in seminary or they read it on their own. But what we want to do is be able to emphasize the application of it and how it, so to be able to dialogue about it, there's no charge. But in order to avoid bots and so forth, you need to register on the website. And so we'll link in the show notes to that, theleadersjourney.us. So this starts April 24th. So you're looking at like barely 3 weeks to think about this. Starts on April 24th at 10 a.m. Central. And we'll do that on the fourth Thursdays for 6 months. So there's that. That's a new thing.
The other new thing is that we're going to begin to do some consistent webinars. We're going to schedule those where you can register for them. Often what's going to happen is the webinar is going to follow the podcast topic. And so today we're going to talk about trust, and we're not going to say everything that there is to say. And so we'll follow up with the webinar where there's not only more opportunity to get more of the content out there, but more opportunity for people on the podcast who can interact with us. And on the webinar, there'll be some opportunity for interaction with questions and answers and that sort of thing. And we'll start that on April the 18th at 10 a.m. Central Time. And would love for you to join us and be a part of that. You'll begin getting a regular newsletter from us. We'll have links to that. The links will get in the show notes. And we're pretty excited about this new addition to the work.
Yeah, I think the thing that's going to be really fun about both of those opportunities is that they're interactive. Right. It's not going to be talking head webinar stuff, but let's get in there and have some real conversations.
Exactly.
And you mentioned that today's topic is trust, and the webinar topic will be trust. I have wanted us to talk about this for a long time, just because I just have noticed with our clients and with our team that when trust is low, everything is hard. And I read a quote at some point somewhere, that someone said that when trust is high, we barely even notice it. Right. But that when trust is low, it affects everything we do. And so I've been wanting to talk about something that I don't know that you and I have ever had an actual conversation about. Yeah. Just our assumptions about trust and how to build trust in general. And then we're going to do a second episode where we're going to talk about our unique experience with organizations and clients about how to restore trust when trust is broken.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And so I'm really excited about the topic as well. Every time we do a podcast, we try to do a simple but a complex leadership principle. And in this particular podcast, here's that principle. In relationships and in organizations, everything depends on trust. Understanding how trust works can help us be intentional about building trust and effective in restoring trust.
Yeah, that absolutely everything depends on trust. And so it might help to just identify what we mean by trust. And I personally like the definition that Brene Brown uses. It. She attributes it to Charles Feltman, but that trust is choosing to make something valuable to you vulnerable to the actions of another person.
I love that.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really just kind of captures not only maybe what trust is, but what it feels like.
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And, you know, I think when I think about that, one of the things that I think about, we were in working with a congregation up in Indianapolis this past week, and it occurred to me at some point in the conversation that almost everything we talk about, people tend to hear that in binary terms, like it's this or that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the really important things to name when we're beginning the conversation about trust is that it's not binary. It's not, you don't either have it or you don't have it. It actually, I like to think of it as being like a developmental slide. Down on this end, no trust. And then I began to do things that can build trust, and it doesn't go from 1 to 100. It goes from 1 to 10, 10 to 20, and it develops over time. It's not a binary kind of thing.
Yeah. So we often use the language, I trust them or I don't trust them.
Right.
And we sometimes act as if one act that maybe has caused us to mistrust someone invalidates the whole relationship.
Right.
That
Right.
Because somebody has shown up as untrustworthy in one way or at one time, that now everything about the relationship is contaminated.
Well, and what also seems true in my experience is when trust is high, you can violate trust and still maintain trust. Like you may have a bad moment where you do something that violates trust, but you go back and clean that mess up. And because trust has been high, it remains high. It's when I think there's two things. Is if trust is low, it builds slowly. And if it is high and you make a mess or you make another mess and you don't go clean that mess up, I don't think people are nearly as focused on trust as being perfect as they are authentic about when I make a mess that I take responsibility. I can count on you to clean your messes up.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. And that's one reason I want us to spend a whole episode on,
Yeah.
how to restore trust. Because you're right. If I will go back to that slider that you were talking about,
Right.
if the trust between us is at a 90 and something happens and it drops to 80, we don't really feel that. And
Right.
we've got some time for it to build back up. But there is somewhere a threshold where we start to have the sense that trust is at a deficit.
Yeah.
And then what do we do?
Well, and this is such an important topic that I love what you did in trying to help us prepare for the conversation today. Was you referred to a book that you've given to me, and actually, trust is it's not binary, but it's also not one thing.
Yeah.
There are multiple components to it, and I think there are people in my life that I trust in some of those components and don't trust in some other components, and being able to see those and name those, and beginning to figure out what the skill sets are that I need to work on in order to build trust. All of that is very germane to congregational and organizational leadership, and it's got me pretty jazzed about the conversation today.
Yeah, I love this idea. It's from, again, Charles Feltman's book, The Thin Book of Trust, which is about trust in the workplace. There are other books, who think about trust philosophically and so forth. And I love those books too. And Gottman has written some about trust in marriage, and that's good stuff. But Feltman's writing about the workplace.
Well, now I think we ought to say to our listeners who don't have this book, it's called The Thin Book of Trust because it is a thin book.
It is literally
it's about
a tiny
maybe
book.
25 pages or something. I don't know.
Yeah, something like that. But what it does is kind of point to the complexity of this. And like you said a minute ago, that there are various components to trust. And I really got a sense of this recently. I was talking to someone who had really experienced kind of a betrayal. And they particularly experienced as a betrayal. You could probably go through and kind of, parse it out and decide how much it actually was one. But they talked about, my trust now is zero for this person.
Mm-hmm.
But then later, as they were talking, they acknowledged that this other person really had acted according to their values. They had acted in the way that, was fairly predictable that they said that they would, and that they had worked hard and tried their best.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really interesting in this context of a lot of hurt and frustration that this person was also able to acknowledge, like you said a minute ago, it's not just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so just recognizing the complexity of this, Feltman says that there are 4 components of trust that each, I guess, to keep using the metaphor, that each slide on their own scale,
Right.
and that
Right.
affects the total amount of trust that we have.
Well, and I want to encourage our listeners to listen to these 4 because not only do we tend to think of trust as binary or not, like it's all or nothing, we also tend to think of it in one like hot bowl of spaghetti where everything we're about to talk about is all mished together. And when you can separate them out, you can begin to say, oh, well, so there's these 4 components. And actually, I do trust this and this. It's this component that I need to be working on. And so to listen from that perspective, I think will be, it was really helpful to me when I read the book to be able to think about it in that more nuanced kind of way.
I wonder if this would be a good time for everybody to just stop and think about a relationship maybe where trust is high and also
Right.
a relationship where trust is low, and see if this overlay doesn't help understand those relationships differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to unpack these one at a time. And I want to say one other thing, that we don't just want to be thinking about other people and their trustworthiness, but we also want to be looking in the mirror, right, at ourselves to say, am I trustworthy in each of these
Yes.
ways?
Yes.
I went through this. I've gone through this now with a couple of clients where we took a leadership team and I just kind of put together an informal survey to
Right.
get a sense of how people on the leadership team rated each other, but then also how they rated themselves.
Yeah.
And then we would look at the results afterward. It's really helpful.
Well, it is so important because in systems thinking, any problem that exists in a system, everybody's contributing to it. And where I don't trust you and I
Right.
tend to look at you and say, you're the problem that needs to be
Yeah.
fixed, to be able to ask, what have I contributed to the lack of trust by what I do or don't do, say or don't say, how I say what I say, all those things, I think is important to do both, to like
To
what's
do
out there,
both.
what's in here. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we should just take them one at a time. Does that sound
Yeah. Let's do
okay?
it. Yeah. Mhm.
And the first one is care, and I'm really glad that this one is first. This is just the idea that, do I trust that you have my best interest at heart, that you're not going to deliberately harm me,
Yeah.
that you're not going to take revenge or exploit me on purpose, that sort of thing, just a basic level of care. The Bible says that love covers a multitude of sins. And
Mhm. Mhm.
of all of these components, this is the one that I think people care about the most. And when this one is violated, it's the one that hurts the most.
Well, I love what you said. A part of what happens when trust gets violated, when intensity, anxiety really gets stirred up. Sometimes I'll be talking to a coaching client. They'll be telling me about something that'll happen. And I'll say, so do you think that person woke up this morning and said, I'm going to see if I can jerk him around today. I'm going to see if I can mess with his pocketbook or mess with his job. And almost always, not always, but almost always, the answer is no, that didn't happen. So they actually do care about you. There's something else that's going on, but at the heart of the relationship, you can affirm that this person has your best interest at heart.
Yeah, and I think it's also important for me to look at, how do I build my skills in being trustworthy with care, to make sure that I'm being careful
Right.
with other people.
Full of care. Hmm.
Yeah, that I'm not being arbitrary or just, random with them. Some of the skills that go with this one are empathy, the ability to see things from another point of view, give them the benefit of the doubt, understand why they may have done something. Those are all skills that go with trustworthiness and care.
In my own story, I think it's maybe the most important thing that I had to learn in my early adult years as a leader. I was a really good administrator. I got a lot of things done. I worked really fast. I was good at what I did, but often I would not realize the impact of my behavior on other people, and that they would be frustrated or alienated or sometimes have their feelings hurt and would go away. And I remember Julia Price, who was the matriarch of our church that I was serving at the time, who said to me one day, she said, "You're really great at what you do, but you don't listen." And I've spent a lifetime. I mean, even to this day, I still feel like there's a little bit of a deficit that I'm working on to have empathy, to tell my story with vulnerability, to listen to your story with vulnerability, learning to have another person's best interests at heart is like for me at the core of all that.
Yeah, they say people don't care what you know till they know that you
Right,
care.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
so, I don't know if this is true, but in my mind, if this was a pie chart, like half of trust would be care. And then the other
Yes.
components would take up the other half.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the second component is sincerity.
Yep.
And basically, it's the idea, are you who you seem to be? Are you real? Are you authentic? And I go back in our relationship where I think for us, trust slides up and down and has now for 20 years. And I remember kind of holding back on something. I don't remember if I was trying not to hurt your feelings or I don't know, but you saying, if you don't tell me what you're thinking, I can't trust you. And I remember, so that's an experience I had, like the one you described earlier.
Right.
Wow, I had not even thought about that as an element of trust.
Yeah. Well, and I remember that experience, and what I remember thinking was, if she won't tell me this, what else is she not telling me?
Yeah.
And it just made me nervous.
Right. And I had never thought of that as being a
Right.
component of trust.
Right.
Right. And I imagine I probably thought I was protecting you or protecting me, one or the other, or
Yeah.
both,
Yeah.
and didn't think about it as being an element of trustworthiness.
And so one of the skills there would be learning to say saying what you see from where you sit, growing your capacity to be authentic. In the work we did in faith walking, and now that we're doing our own work, we see authenticity as a skill that you learn over time. I remember our friend Marcus saying, you can be authentic and be a jerk.
Right. It's true.
That's part of what that communicated to me was that there is a skill to being authentic. And the more I have the sense that you're saying what there is to say, that you're saying with kindness and respect, but you're actually, and especially maybe when you see it differently than I see it, or you're going to say, I have a counterpoint to your point, knowing that you're doing that with authenticity and with kindness is a really important part of that process for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even the person that's a jerk, at least you know where you stand, right? And
Right.
that, I think that does, even though they're a jerk, and I'm not recommending that, I do think there's a sense, I'm thinking of Kim Scott's work on radical candor that says in many cases, we will trust that person more than we trust the person who isn't showing up authentically.
Yeah, I would distinguish. Like, I want to just push back a little bit on being a jerk. I would distinguish being a jerk from actually being self-differentiated. Like, I may say to you, when you do that, how I experience that is X, Y, or Z. Or I can say, when you do that, you're being a jerk, and I don't like it when you do that.
Oh, I would absolutely make that distinction. But I would
Yeah.
also say in her research, people who are highly direct
Right.
and are not particularly caring, their scores
Yeah.
on the caring score are
Yeah.
low. They tend to be not just direct, but kind of rude.
I see. Well,
People
actually,
would still rather know where they stand than not.
actually, you're describing what I was describing with Julia Price. She was saying, you're really direct. You say what you think. You get things done, but you run over people and don't realize that you've done that. And that, so yeah,
but,
I can see
people
that.
would prefer that to
Right, exactly,
my style,
exactly.
which is just to kind of keep things in and shift them around in my own mind. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So the third skill or the third piece of trust is reliability. Um, we talk almost in every conversation that we have about integrity, about doing what you say you'll do, when you say you'll do it, in the manner that it was meant to be done. And again, not hearing that as a rigid rule or some kind of legalism, but just growing our capacity to honor our word, to do what we say we're going to do. And if I have a friend who was never on time for a meeting, and he began to get attuned to some of the stuff that we're talking about. And one day he asked a really important question. He said, "What's the impact of the fact that I'm never on time for a meeting?" And I, not uncharacteristically, very directly said, "It makes me not trust you."
Yeah.
And because if you're not doing what you said you'd do in this area of your life, where else are you not doing that? And that was for him a breakthrough moment, and it was a moment for me to be able to see that I'm going to build trust with other people. Like as a people pleaser, as a guy who wants you to like me, and you say, "Can you do this?" and I just say yes because I want you to please me, but then I don't get it, and I don't get it done on time. All of those things are part of what I contribute and what can be contributed. So reliability becomes a really important part. And yeah, I got three thoughts running through my head. I'm sorry. Uh, uh, and a part of what has happened in my growth and development has been that I've had to learn to say no. I'm a people pleaser, and you ask me to do something, and I'm going to say yes, and I may work 16 hours a day to get it done. I'm more likely to do that than I am to not get it done. And so I think learning to say, I have limits, I have boundaries, and I'm going to have to set those boundaries. And that's been a real challenge for me over the years.
Yeah, you're going to work the 16 hours and that's going to make you trustworthy because you are going to deliver it, but it's not good for you. And it's not the way things are designed to be. I think in the organizations we work with that have a strong commitment to excellence, this is a really big one because, if somebody doesn't get some information to the next person, everything grinds to a halt. Or if somebody says, I will have this done by a certain date, and then it's not, in some of the companies we work with, it starts to cost them money, right? If that's not available, or someone at one level is left holding the bag, looking bag, because somebody else didn't follow through on something that was part of the process. And so it sounds like a little thing sometimes, oh, so I was late, or I was a little late on this thing, or I meant to get it done, that sort of thing. But, Jesus kind of said we prove our trustworthiness in the small things, then we're trusted with the big things. And I think this is really true, maybe more in a business setting than in other settings. But, can I rely on you to do what you said you would do is big.
Well, and both in business and in the congregational world, where growth is a mindset. Like we measure success of the church by church growth, we measure the success of the business by increased ROI. And I mean, you can do that and use people for a long period of time, but what happens is they burn out, they become cynical, they don't bring their best selves. I'm doing quite a bit of reading these days because I'm really interested in this about how you balance that. In the younger generations, they're saying, "I'm not going to work 16 hours a day," and businesses are having to deal with that. And so asking I really doing a lot of reading about how do you have a growth mindset, which I value, without treating people in unreasonable ways, without treating them in ways that would burn them out or treat them like some tool in your agenda. I think all of that is really interesting stuff. And in terms of trustworthiness, if you're the leader and you're having me work 16 hours a day in order to get something done, and you get the credit for that, or even if I get the credit for it, if you're treating me in a way that is inhumane, and I like that language, then my trust for you is diminished.
And that goes up to care, right?
Exactly.
I mean, I may trust you to run this business competently, like we're going to talk about in a minute, but I don't trust that you care about me and that you won't exploit me.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
The skills for reliability are, some that I think for some people it's hard to draw this line, but things like time management, things like increasing our executive function so that we are working on the right things at the right time and can manage a calendar and can manage a work process, the workflow. One skill about this, I think, this may go back to something you said a while ago, is being able to ask questions about what are your expectations for this,
Right.
so that I can give you, what you need when you need it, rather than just making assumptions about that. Engaging in a commitment process where I'm able to say, this is what I need in order to deliver this. And in an authoritarian system, for example, people won't do that. They say
Right.
yes, but they do no. And so I think if we find a place where trustworthiness is low here, it can be in the person. Maybe their executive function isn't good and there's some skills they need to learn, but it can also be in the system. Are people free to say what is actual reality, or do they just have to try to keep hustling and hope that at some point they'll deliver something that you want? So
I love the story out of Stephen Covey's old book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective
yeah.
People, where there are 5 managers and a boss, and the boss is just really demanding, and 4 of the guys do everything that gets asked to be done, but they gossip and complain, and they're exhausted. And he goes to the 5th guy and says, I want you to take this assignment on. And the guy opens up his whiteboard and says, okay, I've got these 5 things that I'm working on for you right now. Which one of these do you want me to give up in order to work on that? And Covey talks about how that guy became the most valued guy in the organization because he was able to deliver on the things that he was asked to deliver on by managing the expectations.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And the idea that that's trustworthiness, I don't know, that's something that we can think about.
exactly.
The fourth and last component of trustworthiness for Feltman is competence. And this is just basically, can I trust you to actually do the thing? Do you know how to do it? Are you capable of doing it? I think it would be fair to say, for example, that I trust Craig absolutely implicitly about care. I mean, I know that he loves me. I am not going to let him replace a filling or re-roof my house, right? Because he doesn't know anything about that stuff. And so really being able to just say, can I trust that you know how to do this? I think that comes up maybe more than we realize.
Well, and as I was getting ready for today, I was thinking about, so what do you say about what we just said when you take Todd Bolsinger's Canoeing the Mountains and being off map? And so, like, I don't know how to do this because I'm exploring new territory. But what I came to was, you may not know how to do this, but I trust you to be a learner. I trust you to report what you're learning and make adjustments as that needs to be done. I trust you to recognize that we are off map and that there's kind of a different set of rules to play by, and that you're playing by those rules as you do that work.
I'm working with someone right now that I love this because she will say, I've never done this before. I'm going to have to do some research, but I'll come back and tell you what I learned. And we have gotten so much done to the point that now I will just hand it over, because I know that if she bumps up against something she doesn't know how to do, she'll figure it out. And if she can't figure it out, she'll come back and tell me.
Exactly. She's remarkable.
I love that. Yes. And so, so the skills here are being a learner, like you said, being able to ask for help, being able to, and I think this is important, that I am known that if I do commit to something, I will deliver it not only reliably, but with excellence. That I'm not going to do it halfway. I'm not going to leave parts of it undone, and so forth. And so,
So we've already talked about this some, but I think before we go, we ought to just circle back around. What would you say the relationship between trust and boundaries is? What would you say about that?
Yeah, I love this. This is really important to me, very influenced by Brene Brown's work here, of course. But the idea that at the end of the day, it's more important that I be able to trust myself. You know, you may not be trustworthy. I mean, you personally are very trustworthy. But the other, okay, so let me go back and say, I hear people say, I'm really working at trusting so and so. And sometimes I think, why? I mean, why are you working at trust? They need to be working at being trustworthy. Why are you working at trusting them? I would rather, in terms of boundaries, because boundaries are something I place on myself and my own life.
Right.
I can trust that no matter what the other person does, I can trust myself to be okay, to find a way to be okay, which then makes it less dangerous for me to practice trusting someone else. I also think that one of the best ways to find out if another person is trustworthy is to set a boundary and see if they will honor it. Because if they will, and particularly if honoring it costs them something, in my mind, that their ability to be trusted goes way up. That's how I see it. Do you see that differently?
No, I see it very much the same. And I think that is such a rich topic that it probably deserves another whole podcast because there's a lot of nuances to that could be sussed out in a helpful kind of way. And so we don't have time to do that today. We'll put that aside for the next podcast.
Right.
What would you say about trust and accountability?
Yeah, there again, if someone won't take responsibility for themselves, my trust in them goes down. I mean, I will trust someone who fails more than I will trust someone who won't take responsibility for themselves.
100%.
But then also for myself, if I'm taking responsibility for myself, then I can trust a situation at least that far. I can trust, again, that I can manage even if someone else isn't completely trustworthy. If I'm taking responsibility for myself, I am not completely at their mercy. Right. If that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
So,
well, I want to say again, the book, it was really helpful to me. You gave it to me maybe a year and a half ago. It is a very thin book, so you can sit down and read it pretty quickly. It's been fun to be reminded of this and think about the various applications and nuances of this as we work in various setting. I want to go back to where we started, and that's to say that trust is at the core of almost everything we're working on in organizations. I think it's Stephen Covey who has a book called Leadership at the Speed of Trust, or something like that. And he writes about the importance of trust being just core to everything. We can look that up and put the right title in the show notes, but it is something like that. I want to say to all of my clients, this is like the foundation on which so much else gets built.
Yeah, I want to ask people, whether it's your family or your team at work or whatever, I think it would be really useful to just talk through this. What we've done today is put some of the basic assumptions out there. But what I want us to do next time is really delve into the reality of betrayal and the pain that goes with trust being broken. And what do you do when you are committed to people, or they are committed to you, or you're responsible to people, and trust is low? How on earth do you dig yourself out of that pit? And so that's what we're going to talk about next time. I do want to ask our listeners to do a few things. It would be really helpful for us. If you don't subscribe to this podcast, please do. If you haven't left us a review, and it would be a really good review, would you
want to be real clear?
Would you please do that? It really does make a difference. And then also we would invite you to go to our website, theleadersjourney.us, sign up for the newsletter. That's kind of where all the freebies come. So please do that. And then just a quick reminder about the book club coming up soon, April 24th, and then even sooner, the webinar where we'll have a conversation about trust. That's on April 18th. And you can get all that info in the show notes and on the website.
Yep. This has been fun for me today. Thanks, Trisha. And thanks to you for listening. Take care.